Jake Paul vs Nate Diaz, round-by-round live updates. MMA fights have live update round-by-round. Jake Paul vs Nate Diaz. This fight is for one of the most anticipated boxing fights of the year at the American Airlines Center in Dallas on Saturday night. The main event is expected to kick off around 11 p.m. Eastern Time on DAZN and PPV pay-per-view. Jake Paul will try to bounce back from his first career losing streak with a split decision from Tommy Fury this February. This would have been the longest fight of Paul's career if it had been that far. Nate Diaz will make his first pro boxing debut at the age of 38. This will be his first fight since his departure from the UFC. Jake Paul came in first and he looked calm, almost reserved as he made his way to the ring. It's been a pro-Diaz crowd all week and tonight was no different. Huge cheers to the old UFC star. Round 1. Referee Mark Caloy is ready for the main event. Paul scored first with a body shot, both fighters kept their hands low. Paul with some wild punches and he connected with a spinning left. Paul's right hand hurts Diaz. Paul wants to land with more power and Diaz tries to tie him up, but Paul ignores him. Hard body shot by Pau and two more straight shots landed for Paul. Diaz ties Paul to the ropes for a short break. This is all Paul, even Diaz isn't sure he's hit the punch. Diaz earned another tie-up, but he still had to survive the last 30 seconds on this one. MMA fighting score 10-8, Paul. Act 2. Diaz comes right at Jake, just stepping forward with his guard up. Paul missed with a big punch, Diaz with a few repeated shots that had little impact. Diaz ducked right into Paul's right hand. He wanted to work in the clinch with Paul. A short shot from inside Diaz. There is an appeal to the crowd by Diaz. Glance to the left by Diaz and scores a body shot for Paul. There was a good right off Paul, he just put that hand up and shot and Diaz counter left. Paul is to the body and Diaz under some pressure to close out the round. Better chapter for Diaz, so still not great. MMA fighting scores Paul 10-9 and overall, Paul 20-17. Round 3. Diaz is back on track. Paul looks to stop the charges with punches. There's a straight left by Diaz and a light punch from Diaz, he makes Paul uncomfortable. Jake's left counter connected and Diaz bustled, but struggled to connect with anything substantial. Score right hand step for Paul and glance left hook by Paul. Paul aimed right at Diaz's midsection and Diaz opened up and he scored. Paul lands heavier shots so far. MMA fighting scores 10-9, Paul overall, Paul 30-26. Round 4. Paul lands punches as Diaz tries to surround him. Diaz had moments when he could make this ugly, but it was Paul who controlled the range the most. There have been multiple hooks for Diaz and there's been a double whack by Paul. Paul stuck his tongue out at Diaz who came forward and scored. They trade uppercuts and Diaz with a clear volume advantage in this frame. Diaz's combination put Paul on the back foot and got a body punch from Diaz and it was a spin from Diaz. MMA fighting score 10-9, Diaz overall, 39-36 Paul. Round 5. Good shot from Paul to start. Diaz takes body shots and pretends to be hurt and Diaz punches the body. Jab by Diaz, Paul lands a body shot, left hook by Paul. Another left hook lands and Diaz stumbles badly, the first knockdown for Paul in this respect. Paul is patient, but he wants to end this one as the action resumes and another Kiri stuns Diaz. Paul shot one to the body and Diaz showed life, chasing Paul with punches after. We'll go to the 6th round. MMA fighting score 10-8, Paul. Altogether, 49-44 Paul. Round 6. Paul opened with a right in the middle and he continued to mix body shots. Paul wanted that close shot and not much output from Diaz in this round. Combo by Diaz as he again presses Paul and another left hook from Paul's score. The weapon served Paul well throughout the fight. MMA fighting score 10-9, Paul. Altogether, 59-53 Paul. Round 7. Paul moves well and attacks Diaz after a body head combo by Paul. This was target practice for Paul, unsure what Diaz was waiting for, and Paul won another exchange. Diaz had trouble landing anything with Paul circling around the ring to score another left hook for Paul. Diaz landed close, nothing heavy. MMA fighting score 10-9, Paul. Overall, 69-62 Paul. Round 8. Now it's Paul's turn. He doesn't give Diaz a chance to start a comeback. Diaz focused on defense, a few outs now leaving Paul content with pot shots unless Diaz is open. Diaz offered the occasional counter, but Paul was up on the scorecard and he let Diaz take the hits. Diaz was aggressive, much to the delight of the crowd because Diaz was with some good shots. Left hand scores for Diaz and the bell rings as he wants to follow up. MMA fighting goes 10-9, Diaz. Overall, 78-72 Paul. Round 9. Paul lands and Diaz looks immovable in a good mix of body and head shots from Paul. Paul got back to the body and straight right slowed down Diaz. More punches from Paul as he spins away as Diaz wants to tire Paul, but he doesn't waste much. There was a rush from Diaz and he immediately stopped to taunt Paul, resulting in a right hand score for Diaz and a right hook by Diaz. MMA fighting score 10-9, Paul. Overall, 88-81 Paul. Round 10. Paul comes out with a shot. There's one for the body, one for the head. Diaz is a nail, sure, but he's going to have to go a lot harder if he wants to steal this one. Another body-head combo connected for Paul. And again, the combo lands at will. Diaz leaned against the ropes for a moment, hard to tell if he was tired or playing around. He tells Paul to do it and Paul obliges and Diaz lands some counter punches. He shot Paul in the corner. The right hand connects for Diaz and Paul ties it up. Diaz had 1 minute left to make things happen and was hooked left by Paul. Paul hits Diaz with an uppercut and Diaz raises his hands in victory for a reason. A kind hug after the bell rings. MMA fighting score 10-9, Paul. Overall, 98-90 Paul. Official result. Jake Paul death Nate Diaz via unanimous decision 97-92, 98-91, 98-91. After that, Paul and Diaz said that they were interested in doing an MMA fight. Diaz joked that he was a foot early in the fight in a late guillotine, so he already won that fight. The two of them had great respect for each other afterward. Paul said if it wasn't Nate he was interested in a Tommy Fury rematch, but there were other options and he was happy with the win.